From PRX, this is Living on Earth. I'm Steve Curwood.
And I'm Ainsley O'Neill, celebrating Earth Day with data that challenges what we think we know about solutions to climate change.
The majority of people on the left care about climate, but also more than half of people on the right also care about climate. Right? So this notion that it's only people on the left that care about climate is just not true. But that breaks down even further when you just stop talking about climate and you just talk about clean energy.
And moments from Moon Day brought to us by the Artemis astronauts.
They just kept saying, we choose Earth and we choose each other. And I think that message brought from basically the other side of the moon is really impactful right now and offers a new perspective and brings the moon closer to home, but also brings us all here on Earth a little bit closer together.
That and more this week on Living on Earth. Stick around.
From PRX and the Jennifer and Ted Stanley studios at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, this is Living on Earth. I'm Ainsley O'Neill.
And I'm Steve Curwood. Earth Day comes in a moment of human solidarity during times as troubled as back during the first Earth Day in 1970. Violent Vietnam War protests, burning black ghettos, and girdles and bras publicly trashed by feminists spoke of great social divides. And then, like the sweetest chord in a symphony, Christmas Eve of 1968 brought photos of Earth taken by the first humans to circle the moon. We gasped as Apollo 8 showed all of us were on a single gorgeous blue marble, shimmering in the black vastness of space. Within 16 months, the first Earth Day had brought 20 million Americans together in peaceful demonstrations, which is still a record. We rallied to care for our common home, and for that day at least, each other. This Earth Day much does seem to divide us, but we have brand new pictures with an Earth overview thanks to Artemis II. To see if history can offer help, we turn now to Adam Rome, University of Buffalo environmental historian and author of The Genius of Earth Day. Welcome to Living on Earth.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here.
So, tell us a little about the political atmosphere of the late 60s. I mean, to what extent did movements like civil rights, the anti-war, women's rights set the stage for that first Earth Day, do you think, in 1970?
The founder of Earth Day was a senator from Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, and he was a liberal Democrat. So he was interested in all the big issues of the day. But when he had been governor, he became convinced that the environment was going to be the biggest issue that we had to solve. So there's no doubt that the sort of protest spirit and the sense that things were going wrong, but also the sense that a lot of people had that if we really set our minds to it, we could solve a lot of problems, was really important. And not just for him. He ended up hiring a whole bunch of 20-something people to help him organize Earth Day, and they had all been involved in the anti-war or the civil rights or the feminist movement. Only one of them had any environmental experience. So it was a cause that I think brought a lot of people who'd been involved in other unrest in the 60s and other movements to try to make the country better. But surprisingly, it also appealed to conservatives. It was really bipartisan. And that nowadays, it's kind of mind-boggling to me to think about that.
So how many people were in attendance on that first Earth Day? I hear the number 20 million.
Yeah, 20 million people was about an eighth of the population, which was astonishing. Pretty much every college, every K-12 school had some kind of Earth Day event. And there also were events in public spaces and in front of offices of corporations or government buildings. So it was everywhere. It was such a big deal that Congress shut down for the day. 2/3 of the members were going to be speaking somewhere. And that was Republicans as well as Democrats.
Now, your book describes the first Earth Day as a teach-in or a national conversation about the environment. What was the energy like on that first Earth Day of 1970, do you think?
The teach-in was Gaylord Nelson's phrase. That was a strategy that the anti-war movement had used a few years before to have these sort of politicized events on campuses that brought both pro-war and anti-war people together to debate. And Gaylord Nelson was convinced that that could empower people, that it could lead them to action. So he said he would organize an environmental teach-in. But I think his insight was shrewd, that the issues hadn't really been widely discussed. There weren't a lot of experts. There weren't a lot of books. There weren't journalists writing on the environmental beat. And Earth Day became this soul-searching experience for a lot of people. That was a phrase the New York Times used to describe Earth Day events at the University of Michigan. And tens of thousands of people spoke on Earth Day who had never spoken about environmental issues publicly. People really debated, first of all, how serious the issues were. Were they annoyances or were they civilization threatening? People debated, how deep did the causes go? I mean, was there something fundamentally wrong with capitalism? Was there something fundamentally wrong with Judeo-Christian religious tradition? Or was it something that you could just, through ordinary political means, figure out solutions to? And people also really had to decide how much it mattered to them personally. Were they going to do anything different? This was also the first time, really, that people imagined that maybe they needed to consume less or differently. So people asked really practical day-to-day questions. What do we do about Lake Erie? It seems to be dying. To these apocal existential kinds of questions about what kind of relationship we had with nature and whether that needed to change in some profound way. So the conversations, they were civil, but they were incredibly challenging. They forced a lot of people to think about things in a way they hadn't thought about before.
This year's Earth Day draws a lot of parallels to that first event back in 1970. Both then and now, we're seeing a lot of political division and unrest. The U.S. is waging a war in another country, in another continent, but at the same time, we're sending people to the moon. How can we apply lessons from the original movement to today, do you think?
That's a great question, Steve, and really, really hard to answer. In the past, I could easily give a variety of lessons about what made Earth Day so powerful, what was the genius of Earth Day, and ways that we, even though we can't ever have another Earth Day like 1970, what we might do. The current moment feels much more challenging to me because although there are all the parallels that you just mentioned, I don't think people in 1970 really thought that democracy might be at stake. And a lot of people did look then to government to help solve these problems. And there's a huge part of our country now that just can't begin to accept that idea. So I think actually, when I talked about this with my students, they're really interested in finding ways to bridge the partisan divide, if that's possible. And many of the ways that they find compelling are not big public events that are obviously political, but other kinds of things. Like they have hopes that community gardens could bring people together and be empowering and allow people to talk who might otherwise disagree about a lot of things. And if they start growing some of their own food, they might think about other environmental issues. So that's really profoundly different than Gaylord Nelson's sense that if we just had a really civil but deep conversation, people would change. It's hard to imagine a really civil, deep conversation right now for lots of reasons.
So despite the unexpected success of its inaugural event, 20 million people attending, today Earth Day feels, well, let's face it, a little more symbolic than it is impactful. It might be celebrated, say, with a local trash cleanup or maybe a craft in a classroom, if it's remembered at all. So how do we get there?
Well, ironically, Gaylord Nelson never envisioned when he was first planning Earth Day 1970 that it would be more than a one-time event. And some places have had Earth Days ever since, and sometimes they're pretty amazing. But as you say, mostly they're much tamer. They're mostly for kids. And the 2020 one, which would have been the 50th anniversary, was wiped out by the pandemic. So we don't have that example. There had only been one other one that was nationally organized. That was 1990, the 20th anniversary. So we don't really have a recent example of what a really kick-ass Earth Day could be. And this year, I asked my class, what do you expect this year? And they all expected pretty much nothing. I hope they're wrong, but they had a hard time imagining anything really dramatically meaningful. Other than, and this show is a great example of it, people pausing and saying, let's talk about this and see where we're at.
So sometimes in the classes you give, people ask your opinion. Professor, what do you think of all of this? What have we lost by not paying much attention to Earth Day anymore? And you would say?
I've been asked over the years by a number of people, like, is it even worth it to have Earth Day anymore? And that question to me is less interesting than asking questions about why the first one was so powerful and what we could learn from it. So the lessons that we learned from the first Earth Day might not be applied to Earth Day itself. The biggest lesson I draw is that it was empowering. And so how can we think about what would be empowering today? What would change the way people think and act? And it might be something totally different than what we think of as Earth Day. But I think for me, whenever I get depressed, and it's not hard to get depressed when you think about climate change and some other issues, I am inspired by the story of the first Earth Day, which was totally unexpected and led in all kinds of ways to dramatic, measurable progress in dealing with environmental problems. Our air is much cleaner. Our water is much cleaner. All the problems that people wanted to address in 1970, we've done a lot. We haven't solved them all, but we've done a lot. So I would say, read about the first Earth Day and see if that inspires you. I think we need inspiration, and especially we need to do things that make us feel more powerful. We can't solve any problem if we all feel powerless.
Adam Rome is an environmental historian and a professor at the University at Buffalo. His book is called The Genius of Earth Day, How a 1970 Teach-In Unexpectedly Made the First Green Generation. Professor, thanks so much for taking the time with us today.
It was my pleasure, Steve. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Coming up, we sent humans back to the moon, and in return got some amazing photos, scientific observations, and a big dose of moon joy. Keep listening to Living on Earth. If you're one of Living on Earth's listener supporters, or if you've been considering a donation to LOE, this message is for you. As a nonprofit news organization, listener support is vital to LOE's weekly effort to bring you up-to-date environmental news and information. Your gift to LOE makes a difference and makes our work possible. So thank you. It's Living on Earth. I'm Ainsley O'Neill.
And I'm Steve Kerwood. This year, as we look forward to Earth Day, once again, we humans have been able to celebrate some special moon days. After all, as a species, we have an insatiable desire to turn our eyes skyward and gaze at the universe beyond our home planet. And when we think of space exploration, one of the things that captures our attention the most is our constant companion, the moon.
NASA's Artemis program is organizing a series of complex missions with the end goal to establish a continuous human presence on the moon and set up the infrastructure and technology for future missions to Mars and beyond. And on April 1st, the Artemis II astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen set out for a flyby around the moon. And there was a collective sigh of relief when a little over 9 days later, they landed safe and sound back on Earth. And on the science side of things, in addition to testing out Orion spacecraft systems, the crew was able to make some observations that are helping to expand our knowledge of our nearest neighbor, as well as the Earth itself. For more, I'm joined now by Kelsey Young, the Artemis II lunar science lead, who was in the thick of spaceflight operations as part of the crew at Mission Control. Kelsey, welcome to Living on Earth.
Thanks for having me and for your interest in what we're doing.
What were some of those standout observations that were made by the astronauts in the Artemis II crew that we, from here on Earth, had previously never seen before?
Our highest prioritized lunar science objectives, we had 10 objectives and 2 of them were kind of binned as priority 1. One was color and albedo variations and specifically crude observations of those variations. And then the second highest priority one was impact flash investigations, investigating kind of the modern lunar environment and if we have new impact craters forming on the surface today. And we actually did have a couple Apollo crew members see impact flashes from orbit during their missions. But you heard the crew during the flyby, and you'll hear when all of the audio files get released, because they all will be released to the public, lots of descriptions of color. And of course, I think the person who has spent time looking at the moon, which hopefully is a lot of people, say, what color? You know, we see black and we see white and we see gray. But it turns out there are really, really subtle color nuances that you can see, especially when you're as close and have the view that, you know, the Apollo and Artemis astronauts had, that really inform us scientifically about the evolution of the moon and what processes were active and how recently in the geologic history of the moon. So you heard, you know, one thing that got the science team really excited, and this was read out loud on the loops real time. So if you tuned into the flyby, you'll hear it, is a few of them noting shades of brown, and then specifically Jeremy Hansen noticing green around this really neat feature called Aristarchus. That is actually on the near side. You can see it, you know, if you go up and look at the moon at night, you can see Aristarchus. He noticed green color particular, which tells us something about volcanic activity and how recently it might have been active in that area. It's a really high priority destination for future landed science missions, not crewed, but robotic. So those observations had a lot of people in the science backroom really excited.
Well, and tell us about those impact flashes as well, because I believe that I saw you getting particularly excited about those.
Impact flashes are neat. What they are is micrometeoroids striking the surface of the moon and literally creating a flash. And that flash is formed when something that's moving really, really fast collides with the surface of the moon. And it literally, like melts and explodes when it hits the surface. Something that's actually really, really small can create a flash on the lunar surface because they have no atmosphere. So on our planet, if something that small were to get near to us, it would burn up in the atmosphere. But the moon doesn't have that atmosphere, so it will strike the surface and make a pretty bright flash. Apollo crews did see impact flashes. Notably, there was one audio clip we played actually to the Artemis II crew in classroom training beforehand of Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmitt giving an observation of the moon for something else. And you just hear him, be totally excited. Oh, I think I just saw a flash on the lunar surface. And he goes on to describe where he saw it. And so we were really excited about the opportunity for the crew to look for these, especially since we have a wonderful series of groups here on Earth that look for impact flashes on the near side of the moon, which is, of course, the side of the moon that always faces our planet. We have citizen scientists all around the world looking. We have Earth-based observatories looking. We have a group at the Marshall Space Flight Center who is really dedicated to looking for these impact flashes, but they don't see the far side, of course, because that side of the moon always faces away from our planet. And so getting crewed observations in support of these impact flash investigations and trying to track how dynamic the lunar surface is was high priority. And I will be honest, I did not think we would see any.
You were a little doubtful. You were a little skeptical.
Yeah, you have to be looking in the right place at the right time. They only had a few hours. And you heard my shock because not only did they see one, but they saw more than one. So you saw my pure shock, which was like completely a genuine reaction.
Well, of course. How cool is this, genuinely?
It was very cool. I'm so fortunate to work as a part of the lunar science team. We have roughly 60 people pulled from all across NASA centers. And it's not just scientists. It's, visualization specialists, communication specialists. We have people who work on the training materials. It really takes all walks of life to make this happen. But one scientist in particular was kind of the science theme lead for that investigation. And I missed it because I was having my own reaction at the time, but she apparently audibly screamed when I said it in the science back room. I wish I had heard it.
Well, so there's this incredible team that is all working together on this, but there's also the community that gets to benefit from all of this as well. So when we learn these things from these missions, what kind of impact do you think that has throughout the scientific community and even the community of lay people?
I really love and value that question because I think it's really important. What do these missions bring to people that are not career lunar scientists who think about, sending people to the moon? And I have so many answers. I think my top priority answer is inspiring the next generation. And what I mean by that is, I was not alive during Apollo, but hearing from colleagues of mine now and people in my, community that were alive to experience that, it helped them in many cases end up where they are now. It inspired them to pursue their passion and what they wanted to dedicate their life to. And in some cases that was, oh my gosh, I want to do that. I want to go work for NASA. But in other cases, it was completely other relevant scientific disciplines or even just, other disciplines in general. And I've heard stories time and time and time again about the influence that Apollo missions played on people that I know well and respect. And so I'm really optimistic that the Artemis mission, starting with Artemis II, do that for the next generation and to just allow them to see what happens when you pursue your passion and pursue the things that bring you joy, in this case, moon joy. I certainly have 2 young kids, and what I hope for them is that they do something that makes them as happy and fulfilled as this mission made me. And I know from what I've seen in kind of the public response to this mission, it certainly seems to have gotten off on the right foot, that people seem excited and motivated and inspired to look up at the sky and figure out where you might want to go, what path you might want to walk down.
I feel like you can trace it one-to-one when you see the students who were able to interview the astronauts as they were up in space, or even the student who designed I know the official term is the zero gravity indicator, but it was a cute little moon plushie. It was incredible to see the connection. I think all of us felt a sort of childlike joy, but the children were really personally entranced by it.
I think part of that, first of all, desperate for a Rise plushie. I'm told that they're coming soon, but I like to say it's because I have kids, but really also I want one.
I want one, yes.
But, I think part of it is that these 4 crew members are so good at, for lack of a more nuanced term, like saying words, like communicating what they're experiencing and bringing it closer to those of us watching at home. I know they've said it publicly, and I've heard them say it, in classroom training sessions and other training sessions I've had with them. They worked really hard to make sure that this was a mission for everybody all across the world. And they really threw themselves into making sure that we felt that everybody across the world watching at home felt that, and that it was a unifying moment for everyone. You certainly heard those remarks during the mission, and then during their kind of arrival event back at the Johnson Space Center on Saturday, the day after splashdown. Oh my gosh, like such powerful messages of unity that are delivered so beautifully and in a way that a lot of people can access and understand. So I give them so much credit for not just how much work they put in, but who they are as people, that this is something that they felt so passionately about.
Now, this mission really captured the attention and the love of so many of us around the world. And I really do think that a lot of that is thanks to the human undercurrent that ran through even all of this science and technology and everything like that. A couple of the really standout moments, there was the emotional weight of the naming of the Carroll crater after Commander Reed Wiseman's late wife. But there were also the lighter side of things, like the morning wake-up playlist and things like that. So what were some of the standout moments from the crew for you personally, Kelsey?
Certainly, of course, the number one moment has to be the Carroll crater moment. There was not a dry eye, that's for sure. That was just extremely impactful just to have them share that with the world. I was fortunate to actually be in, mission control at the time, but I think even had I been watching it from home, it would have had the same impact. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, right? Mm-hmm. So certainly that. I think when they started getting closer to the moon, like not on flyby day, but in earlier days, and they were able to get views of the moon out the window, the childlike excitement that we were hearing, that's going to stick with me a while. And, I'm fortunate to have spent a lot of time with these amazing people, and that was not a surprise. But hearing it for real, hearing how excited they were, really will stay with me. My most anticipated moment prior to the mission, which bore out, it was really a wonderful moment, was the first time they started giving the real scientific descriptions of the moon on flyby day. We had trained them for so long and in so many ways, and they'd come so far in giving those descriptions that to hear the real thing hit me, and I expected it to hit me, and it did indeed. But other than that, it was kind of just listening to them crush it like I knew they would. The observations they were giving were impactful. They were, of course, inspiring from a human perspective, but scientifically impactful. And I swear when they were, I think it was Victor and Christina that were having a conversation about how when they discussed with each other, they were able to elevate each other's observations, which is exactly what we wanted them to do. It was perfect. And thinking about it later, it's just it just brought me so much joy that they experienced that, because of course that's how the best science is done, is as a team. And the fact that in the middle of this moment, the middle of this several hour flyby where all eyes are on them and they have the real thing out the window and they've been training for 3 years, and they were still having these scientific conversations with each other to elevate each other. They were asking questions about age relationships between lunar farside features to help inform what they were seeing. It was, come on, I can't ask for anything more. It was incredible.
So, Kelsey, one of the images that I think resonated with a lot of us was the Hello World photo that Reed Wiseman took early on the mission. It's this beautiful full planet picture. It's got this great view of the Atlantic Ocean, some of Africa, some of South America. And you can even see both the northern and I think the southern auroras as well. When we look at this, how can we compare this photograph from Artemis II to any of our other photographs of Earth, such as the blue marble from Apollo 17, or just any image that we've ever seen of our home before?
I adore that question. And frankly, I mean, obviously, when we started getting the moon images down later, it was like constant oohing and aahing. But that image that came down that you're referencing early in the mission, I mean, like, took our breath away. I mean, there's no other way to say it. I mean, it was just this spectacular symbol of what we had accomplished so far, which is getting people far enough away from our planet that they could take that picture in the first place. And then anytime I looked closer at it, I saw something new that caught my eye that I hadn't seen before. And I just started squealing every time I saw something new. I mean, even just, of course, the aurora popped out to me as well. And then how the thin line of the atmosphere came down at the southern end, and the way that the interaction that it had with the auroral features on the South Pole took my breath away. Another thing I loved about that image is you could see zodiacal light in that image, kind of down to sort of the bottom right of the picture. And so zodiacal light is basically interplanetary dust. It's dust that's floating in the solar system that you can see in the darkness of space. And that was something we knew that they would be observing when they got to the moon. And so it was this really beautiful sort of here is our planet, here's where we came from. We have this view in the first place because we accomplished something incredible. And here's this little ode to something we'll be seeing, in a few days. So an extremely impactful image. And, I think listening to the crew describe, both in the mission and then in their event that they did when they got back to Houston, of seeing Earth suspended in the blackness of space. It hit me in the moment when I heard them say it, but then they said it again, and it kind of took my breath away again, because, 3 of those 4 people had spent months on the International Space Station taking beautiful pictures of Earth. And this was entirely new vantage point and an entirely new, literal view of our planet that was made possible because of reaching for something greater. And it just is emblematic of, I think, this new generation of exploration. It's emblematic of these 4 people and what they were able to accomplish. And yes, first of all, I'm a geologist. I study the moon, but I also study Earth. So I think I'm excited for the moon pictures, but I was just blown away by that early image of our own planet and what it symbolized to me.
Well, and I want to make this connection here. You here as a lunar science lead and also obviously a geologist. I'm here as living on Earth. What are we learning about Earth when we learn about the moon?
The answer that I love to give, because it inspires me every day when I go to work at NASA, is that the moon, we like to say, is a witness plate for the entire solar system, and specifically for our own planet here on Earth. And that is because we're essentially in each other's backyards. I mean, they're only a couple day flight away, right? So from a solar system perspective, we're next door neighbors and then some. And Earth has plate tectonics and oceans and vegetation that often obscures big parts of our history on Earth. We have very little really old crust from billions of years ago exposed on our planet because it has been recycled by plate tectonics. Even if you go to, the deepest parts of the ocean, you're not going to be able to access that early chunk of our own planet's history. But on the moon, if you know where to look and you know how to look, you can access that part of our own history by going to the moon to evaluate things like what the impact history looked like at that time, which had a lot of impact on how our own planet was developing at the time. And so the fact that you can go to the moon to learn about Earth in a way that you can't here on Earth is really inspiring for me. And I think we have so many questions for lunar science in its own right, and those are obviously super critical, but there is a lot of value as well in what lunar exploration can tell us about Earth. I think there's also the more human element of things, of stepping away from our planet to gain a new perspective, literally and figuratively. And you heard that just echoed over and over and over again by the crew. I mean, I think repeatedly they just kept saying, we don't leave Earth, we choose Earth, and we choose each other. And I think that message brought from basically the other side of the moon is really impactful right now and offers a new perspective and brings the moon closer to home, but also brings us all here on Earth a little bit closer together.
Kelsey Young is the Artemis II lunar science lead. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And while we put out amazing images, during the mission, more data will be coming out, more images will be coming out. New images even came out, a few days after the mission, and NASA will continue to release them as we get them processed. So the journey does not end here for Artemis II. Please do continue to follow along, and please continue to look at the moon. Thanks for having me.
And you can find those images and more on our website, loe.org.
Just ahead, if you do the math, there is plenty of hope for the health of this beautiful blue marble we all share. Stay tuned to Living on Earth.
Support for Living on Earth comes from the Waverly Street Foundation, working to cultivate a healing planet with community-led programs for better food, healthy farmlands, and smarter building, energy, and businesses.
Here at Living on Earth, we work hard each and every week to bring you the most relevant and compelling environmental news. As a nonprofit organization, we count on you to help. Listener support is key to sustaining the environmental news gathering and reporting that you rely on. Please consider doing your part to support Living on Earth. A monthly donation is the very best way to ensure LOE's work continues week after week. To make your pledge of support, go to loe.org and click Donate. And thank you for helping to keep LOE's nonprofit environmental media going strong. It's Living on Earth. I'm Ainsley O'Neill.
And I'm Steve Curwood. When it comes to taking better care of our only home, planet Earth, climate disruption has a lot of people feeling worried and hopeless. And when solutions are offered, they can run into skepticism from people across the political spectrum. For example, many question carbon-free nuclear power, saying it's highly dangerous. And some doubt the advisability of mining a lot of the essential minerals needed for certain renewable energy technologies. But if you do the math carefully and deeply, you will find many of the concerns are based on partial and misinformation, and that the outlook for addressing the climate emergency isn't as grim as some people may think. That's according to data scientist Hannah Ritchie. She has a message of pragmatic hope about the future using data as her guiding star. Hannah Ritchie is deputy editor at Our World in Data and author of Clearing the Air, a hopeful guide to solving climate change in 50 questions and answers. And some of the answers are surprising. She joined us for a session of the Living on Earth book club with our media partner, Inside Climate News. Hannah, welcome to Living on Earth.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Well, let's cut to the chase here. People are somewhat skeptical about dealing with the climate. I mean, we've been talking about it for so long, and it doesn't feel like a lot of progress is being made. So I want you to dive into the very first question of your book for a moment, which, sets things up. It's one of the, quote, big questions you have in your volume, as you call it, and it is simply 4 words. Is it too late?
Yeah, and I think it's a question I hear a lot where I think people do feel very despondent. They feel like we've been on this journey for a long time. We've kind of delayed, and oh no, now it's too late and there's nothing we can do about it. And I think the reality is there is just stuff that we can do, and it's actually never too late. I think what I caveat that around is that there are particular temperature targets for which the reality is that it's too late, right? So I think lots of people pin this around keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees. I'm optimistic, but I'm not that optimistic that I think that we can do that. I think that the reality is that is too late for us now. Like, we just will not be able to achieve the 1.5 degree target. But what's really, really crucial is that it does not mean that it's too late for us to take action and limit temperatures even more. Right? The way that these climate impacts work is the higher the temperature, the increase the danger and the hazard, right? So even if when we go past 1.5 degrees, fighting for 1.6 or 1.7 or 1.8, those incremental changes in temperature do limit damages, and it's worth us investing in those solutions to prevent those damages as much as we can. So no, it's never too late. There's no point at which there's just no point in us trying to take action and limit temperatures as much as we can.
So how do we get to the feeling of, yes, we are really addressing the climate emergency? I mean, how do we get to that point if it's not too late?
I mean, I think there are lots of signs of progress across the world. One of the most optimistic changes for me in the past decade has just been the plummeting costs of renewable energy technologies, right? So when we were looking at this 10 years ago, it was very, very hard for me to see how we would make progress, because the reality is that solar and wind and batteries and electric vehicles were all much, much more expensive than the fossil fuel alternatives. So to me, it just wasn't viable that people would take those extra costs, or could I even afford to take those extra costs for the low carbon option? Now that's flipped and that's the opposite, right? So many of these low carbon technologies are also economically viable or economically competitive. Plus you have the climate benefit as well. And you're seeing that in terms of deployment rates. Like, if you look across the world, most of the new electricity technologies being built today are not fossil fuels, they are renewables. You've seen increasing shares of sales of electric vehicles, right? So take the example of China. In China, now more than half of new cars in China sold are electric. Many other countries are up at 98%. So Norway is up at 98%. So you can look across the world and there are lots of pockets where you can see that progress is happening. And importantly, progress is accelerating. This stuff is getting faster and faster every year.
So how do you make sure your data is true?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I think part of the challenge and part of the reason I wrote the book is because people see so much conflicting data and information. They see a number in a news article or a headline. We put so much emphasis on that, right? We put so much trust in that number, and it's extremely, extremely hard to put that number into context, which is what I try to do in the book. And it's really, really crucial, one, to know, is this a big deal? It's also really, really crucial to understand if a particular solution is greenwashing, for example, right? So you'll often hear reports of this fantastic solution that saved, 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And of course, 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide sounds huge, right? Wow, we've had this massive new solution. And the reality is that we emit 36 billion tons of CO2 every year. So it's being able to understand that context that's really crucial. So my general advice is always, when you see a number, ask, is that a big number? Is that a small number? And compared to what?
Compared to what? Yes. So one of the intriguing pieces of data in your book is about the attitudes of folks here in the United States and the world. You say that, hey, a majority of us are concerned about climate disruption. And yet there's this sort of dark cloud of gloom over, the climate really can't be addressed. What do you think is going on, and how can people get out of that funk?
Yeah, I think there are two attitudes there. The first is this kind of blanket, no one cares, right? Which the data very strongly suggests in every country in the world that's just not true. In every country in the world that's been surveyed, and that's a large number, the majority of people, believe in climate change, care about climate change, are concerned and want to see governments and other policymakers make effort to take climate action. So the notion that, just no one cares is just not true. The majority of people do care. And the second thing that people always bring up is this polarization issue, where often it's framed as people on the left care about climate, but people on the right do not care about climate, and we struggle to make progress because we can't bridge this gap. For most countries in the world, even that polarization gap is really, really small, right? The US is actually a bit of an outlier here. So the US is much more polarized than other countries. So the gap in other countries is very small. But even in the US, I think the gap is exaggerated, right? So the majority of people on the left care about climate, but also more than half of people on the right also care about climate, right? So this notion that it's only people on the left that care about climate is just not true. But that breaks down even further when you actually just stop talking about climate and you just talk about clean energy. Actually, the share of people on the right that support clean energy goes up even more. And you can see that in attitudes, but you can also see that in what's actually happening on the ground, where if you look at where renewable energy is being built most quickly across the US, is in incredibly red states, right? It's not blue states, it's red states, right?
Yeah.
So Texas is a very clear example.
Yeah.
So Texas has been building huge amounts of solar, huge amounts of wind, has now taken over California in terms of how much of this it's building. It's really investing in battery storage, these technologies that people might frame as being lefty, right? Some of the reddest states in the US are building them out very quickly. Now, part of the driver there might be climate, but part of the driver is this other stuff like local air pollution or economic gains or employment. And I think it's really, really important for us, if we're to try to bring as many people along with us as possible, is like, yes, focus on the climate aspect of this. This is really important, but focus on the other stuff that people care about as well, these co-benefits of clean energy, which is not just about climate.
Interestingly enough, Inside Climate's reporter, Dan Carino, was out in Iowa not so long ago. And Iowa, as you point out in your book, is a red state that has the largest proportion of renewable energy. I think it's like 65 or 63%. And yet, when people move to try to install more wind power there, there's sort of a thread of disinformation that sometimes comes out into the discussion there with wind power. And so, what about disinformation? Where does your data say that it comes from? And what, according to the data, can really counteract it, do you think?
It's an interesting question, because I think there is what we might frame as disinformation, which is almost kind of deliberately trying to give someone facts or information that's false, basically telling lies, right? So that's one aspect to this. And I think there's quite a bit of this, often because there are incentives to not shift towards clean energy, right? If you are in the business of fossil fuels, you don't really want this transition to happen. So there's some incentive to deliberately seed doubt. But then what I actually think is more powerful and more persuasive is misinformation, which is not necessarily deliberately telling lies, but it's kind of white lies. You kind of plant a kind of half-truth and don't give people the complete picture by which they would be able to understand whether this is correct or incorrect. It kind of comes back to this context thing, right? Where actually a lot of the most dangerous misinformation is like planting a little seed of doubt or a little half-truth, not giving all of the numbers, just like giving one number that sounds kind of big or kind of small, depending on the context. And I actually think that's more damaging for people than the very, very deliberate disinformation. Often it's easier to spot the disinformation. I think a lot of people are clued into that. It's very, very hard to spot misinformation, especially if you're not an expert in that given area.
Is there an example you'd like to give us on the misinformation that you think has that effect?
I mean, I think coming back to wind energy, right? So like Donald Trump's favourite line when he talks about wind energy is that wind turbines kill millions of birds, right? And that's one reason why we shouldn't deploy wind power. Now, it's actually correct that wind turbines across the US kill a couple of million birds every year. What's missing there is the context of whether that's a little or a lot compared to other hazards to birds. Right. So in the book, I have this chart that shows, basically hazards to birds in the US. Actually, the biggest one is cats, right? So cats in the US kill billions of birds every year. Buildings, fertilizers, roads, these are all much, much higher than wind turbines in terms of the risks and the threats to birds. So I think that's just like one very clear example where it's actually the statement itself is true, but without the context, it's really hard to evaluate whether that should be a blocker on us going forward with wind power or not.
Then you have what we can do about it. It doesn't sound great to have a couple million birds dying every year. And you want to share how you suggest that we deal with it?
Yeah, and I think this part is really crucial. I'm very positive about the solutions that we have to work with and are continue to develop. But the honest answer is that they're not perfect, right? It's not that, any of the solutions don't have any mining impacts or any land use impacts or any impact on wildlife whatsoever. So for each of these questions and these solutions, there are things that we can do and need to do in order to make things better. So to take the bird example, I don't think that the fact that wind turbines kill some birds means that we should stop wind power entirely, right? I think we need to continue and go ahead with the transition. But along the way, there are things that we can do to reduce that toll significantly, right? And there are a range of projects and implementations that actually really make a difference. So, for example, there's been experiments where if you paint the blades of the wind turbine black, or put kind of rings of black on the wind turbines, birds and bats can see them much better and are able to avoid them. There have been experiments where if you for particular birds, and particularly birds of prey, are very much at risk. If you basically switch off the turbines at very, very low speeds where you're not generating much power whatsoever, it dramatically reduces the death toll from birds. So I think the numbers are around more than half the number of birds that are killed. And the amount of energy you lose by turning the wind turbines off at very low speeds is like something like 0.1%. For bats, if you play often ultrasound sounds, it allows them to detect them. So there are a range of things across these different solutions that means that we can make things better and actually reduce the impact even more. And I think it's important that we be able to do both of those things at the same time. Like, we know that we need to go ahead with the energy transition and get a move on. So that shouldn't stop us or halt us from doing that. But there are certainly things that we can do along the way in order to do that in the most responsible way that we can.
There's another area that perhaps is related to misinformation or disinformation that you have in your book, and that's about nuclear power. And there's this public perception that nuclear power is really dangerous. Oh, and it's way too expensive. But your book suggests that, nuclear power is on a par literally with wind and solar as a carbon-free, safe, and relatively reasonable way to get energy. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I think this is a very, very common misconception about nuclear power. It's very dangerous. That's actually been the kind of strongest opposition. It's been strong in the US. It's very strong across Europe. There are many countries have basically shut down their nuclear power plants because of public concerns about safety. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. I think the main one is that when people think about the hazards to nuclear power, it comes back to a few very, very specific headline-worthy events, right? So there's 3 Mile Island, there was Chernobyl, there was Fukushima. So there's really memorable, single, dangerous events that happened, and that's what comes to mind for people. But when you look at how many people died across those events for 50 years or more, it's in the thousands, a couple of thousand at most. Now, again, it comes back to context, right? So if you to compare that to how many die from burning fossil fuels, right, one of the alternatives, we have millions of people dying prematurely from fossil fuels every single year, right? So you have millions every year compared to thousands over decades. So when you break it down by, how many deaths occur per unit of electricity produced, burning coal or gas or oil is order of magnitude more dangerous than nuclear power. So the notion that you shouldn't move to nuclear power because it's more dangerous than fossil fuels is just incorrect. But I think it's very, very persuasive and plays a huge role in public perception.
So you must have had some fun doing this, huh?
Yeah. I mean, part of what was enjoyable about it, and I think it's just really, really important, is that for some of the questions, I was also just coming at them, no idea of what the answer would be, right? And just willing to accept what the answer was. So part of it was also just discovery of me. It's like putting into context, how much mining does solar panels and batteries need? And how does that compare to the mining impact of fossil fuels? Like, again, before coming to this, I didn't know exactly what the answer would be. So it was a bit of a kind of discovery process as well, which was, extremely fun.
And what's the answer?
Oh, the answer is that, again, people are very concerned about the mining impacts of renewable energy technologies. And there are impacts that, again, coming back to this, what we need to do next, there are ways and things that we need to do this in a more responsible way. But, if you look at the amount of mining that will basically need to build a clean energy system, over decades will be hundreds of millions of tons of materials, which again sounds huge, hundreds of millions of tons. There's no way that we could possibly do that. But then put it into context, and we're, taking out 15 billion tons of fossil fuels every single year, right? So the amount of mining we need to do for renewables over decades is less than we need to do for fossil fuels in one single year.
So it's fair to say that you are certainly not Pollyanna here in your representation of the facts and the data that are in your book, but you do remain a level of optimism. So what keeps that hope alive for you?
One, the data. I mean, every day I see another data point that suggests we're moving in the right direction. And again, from very, very different parts of the world. Like some country in Africa has just basically banned the sale of new petrol motorbikes, and now they're going electric, where there are actually now a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have more progressive policies on electrification of transport than North America or some countries in Europe. I think there has been this narrative that the energy transition is only for rich countries and they'll do a bit, but the rest of the world are not going to do anything or can't do anything on this. And I think there are a number of stories emerging which is bucking that trend, right? I think following the data and seeing that stuff is happening, even though it might not make, the headlines in the New York Times, right? But it's still happening. If you dig a bit under the surface, you can see that progress is there. And then just another reason I'm optimistic is that I just come across so many fantastic, intelligent, driven people working on these problems and trying to make a difference. And again, it kind of goes on beneath the surface, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Whether it's, trying to improve technologies in batteries or solar power, whether it's trying to change government policies, whether it's trying to change within a boardroom what a company is doing. There are lots and lots of fantastic people trying to make a difference, and that's what really keeps me going.
Hannah Ritchie's book is Clearing the Air, a hopeful guide to solving climate change in 50 questions and answers. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for your time.
Living on Earth is produced by the World Media Foundation. Our crew includes Naomi Ehrenberg, Paloma Beltran, Sophie Boker, Jenny Dorings, Y.M. Gagneja, Mark Kausch, Mark Seth Lender, Don Lyman, Ashanti McLean, Nana Mohammed, Sophia Pandalidis, Jake Rigo, Andrew Scarrett, Bella Smith, Julia Vaz, Elle Wilson, and Hetty Yang.
Tom Tiger engineered our show. Allison Lierstein composed our themes. You can hear us anytime at LOE.org, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube Music. And like us, please, on our Facebook page, Living on Earth. Find us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Living on Earth Radio. And we always welcome your feedback at comments@LOE.org. I'm Ainsley O'Neill.
And I'm Steve Kerwood. Thanks for listening.
Funding for Living on Earth comes from you, our listeners, and from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, in association with its School for the Environment, developing the next generation of environmental leaders, and from the Grantham Foundation for the Protection of the Environment, supporting strategic communications and collaboration in solving the world's most pressing environmental problems.